The boardroom was silent as James Carter said, "We lost everything overnight." He was a determined yet weary entrepreneur, staring at financial reports drenched in red ink. His investors' eyes burned with silent fury. Chairs creaked under shifting bodies, but no one spoke. A storm raged outside, mirroring his collapse. His closest friend, Daniel Brooks, leaned forward, whispering, "James, this is ruin." The betrayal cut deeper than failure itself, for someone within the company had leaked the deal that destroyed them. James clenched his fists under the table, vowing silently, "I'll rise again, no matter the cost." In that instant, humiliation became fuel for a greater fire. The storm outside had not calmed, and neither had James' mind. Alone in his office, he stared at the skyline, whispering, "They think I'm finished." His reflection on the glass showed a man at war with himself. He had gambled everything, and now only ruin stared back. Memories of his late father's words echoed, "Never let failure define you, son." James exhaled sharply, vowing aloud, "I'll rebuild from ashes." His voice cracked, but determination laced each word. The city lights blinked like a challenge, daring him to rise again. Morning came heavy with defeat. James walked through the rain-slick streets, the world moving indifferently around him. Strangers passed without notice, yet he felt every eye imagined his failure. He muttered, "Yesterday I was their rising star. Today I'm their cautionary tale." His shoes splashed through puddles, briefcase heavy with worthless papers. Each step echoed his vow. He wasn't ready to quit, even if the world laughed at him. The battle would start again, even from nothing. James sat in a cafe corner, steam rising from untouched coffee. Daniel arrived, coat dripping, eyes soft with concern. "James, you don't have to fight alone," Daniel said. James looked up, exhaustion etched deep. "I can't quit, Daniel. Not now." Their friendship was forged in struggle, and Daniel's loyalty glimmered in the gloom. For the first time since the collapse, James felt a flicker of hope. If even one person still believed, maybe the dream wasn't dead after all. That night, James sat alone with a notebook, scribbling frantically. Ideas poured like desperate lifelines, each page filled with sketches of a future unseen by others. His hands trembled, but his eyes burned with renewed fire. He whispered, "They'll regret underestimating me." Shadows danced on the walls as his pen scratched relentlessly. The storm had passed, but inside him a new storm raged, not of despair, but of unbreakable resolve. From ruin, he would carve rebirth. James awoke in his small apartment, sunlight slicing through blinds, dust floating like fragments of memory. The storm had passed, yet his mind churned. His phone buzzed with messages he refused to answer. He muttered, "Let them think I'm gone." He dragged his chair to a battered desk, notebook still open from last night, filled with desperate sketches. He traced one line, whispering, "This is the seed." His chest ached with doubt, but the memory of his father's rough hands guiding him through failure returned. Fear fought belief inside him, but belief refused to die. Later that day, James met Daniel at a small park, leaves dripping from the morning rain. Daniel clasped his shoulder and said, "You're not beaten, James. You're just bruised." James forced a smile, his eyes heavy. "Bruised still hurts," he replied, voice low. Daniel gripped tighter. "But bruises heal." James gazed at children playing nearby, thinking of lost innocence. The world felt against him, yet this man stood with him. For a moment, the weight lifted, and he realized his dream didn't have to be carried alone. That evening, James visited his mother, Margaret Carter. She eyed him across the kitchen table, lips thin with worry. "James, when will you stop chasing ghosts?" He swallowed hard, avoiding her gaze. "It's not a ghost, Mom, it's my life." She sighed, pressing a trembling hand over his. "You've lost too much already." He pulled away gently, whispering, "I can't stop now." Her eyes glistened, torn between love and fear. Her silence said more than words. She didn't believe, but she prayed he would prove her wrong. At night, James walked the quiet streets, neon signs flickering, puddles reflecting light. His mind wrestled with doubt and desire. A voice inside whispered, "You're not ready." Another roared, "You cannot quit." He paused before a closed bookstore, staring at titles through the glass. Stories of men who rose from nothing. "If they could, so can I," he murmured. The city's hum seemed to challenge him, the darkness pressing like a weight, yet every breath became defiance. His fear was real, but his resolve burned hotter. The next morning, James met Richard Hale for coffee. Richard's slick smile masked intent, but James felt it like poison. Richard leaned back, saying, "You should quit before you bury yourself deeper." James stared, voice steady. "You betrayed me once. It won't happen again." Richard's smirk widened. "Business is survival, James, not loyalty." James' hands tightened around his cup, but he refused to break. Walking out, he realized the enemy was clear, and the fight would not just be against markets, it would be against men like Richard. The sterile air of the bank office pressed heavy on James as he sat across from the officer. His neatly prepared charts meant nothing against the cold eyes staring back. "Your history shows too much risk," the officer said flatly, pushing the file away. James' jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to plead, but pride chained his tongue. He gathered his papers slowly, the weight of rejection sinking in. Outside, the storm of city traffic roared as if mocking him. He whispered to himself, "Failure isn't the end. Not for me." Every door closing only sharpened the blade of his hunger. He stepped out, broke but unbent, knowing the fight had only just begun. That night, James slumped into a diner booth, neon buzzing above, the world outside dripping rain. Daniel slid a steaming mug across the table. "We'll find another way," he said, eyes steady. James exhaled, the exhaustion visible in his slouched shoulders. "Every door closes before I can knock," he muttered. Daniel tapped the table, firm. "Then we break a window." James cracked a laugh, brief but real, the first in weeks. The weight didn't vanish, but it shifted. Hope flickered, fragile yet alive, lit by Daniel's unwavering loyalty. For the first time, James realized allies could weigh heavier than gold. Days later, James pitched in a cramped community hall, rows of folding chairs creaking under restless listeners. His voice wavered at first, but with each word, it steadied. "This isn't about profit," he said. "It's about purpose." Faces in the crowd shifted, some skeptical, some curious. A man muttered, "Too risky." James swallowed the sting and pressed forward, his arms moving with conviction. No investors shook his hand that night, but as he stepped down, he caught a glimpse, eyes that lingered, brows lifted, curiosity awakened. For the first time since his fall, he wasn't invisible. Doubt still weighed heavy, but so did a new flicker of belief. At a rival's launch event, chandeliers glittered overhead, champagne glasses chimed, and banners declared innovation. James stood near the edge, watching Richard bask in stolen glory. Their eyes locked across the crowd. Richard smirked, lifting his glass as if mocking. James clenched his jaw, rage flaring. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he whispered under his breath. His idea lived on stage, twisted in another's hands. Envy burned hot, but beneath it pulsed clarity. Revenge would waste him. Victory would define him. Watching Richard boast, James vowed he would not fight for applause. He would fight for legacy. Back in his apartment, James collapsed into his chair, lamplight the only glow against the dark. His hands trembled as he scribbled in his notebook, lines of furious ink spilling across the page. Every rejection fueled a new spark. His breath came fast, words whispered into the silence. "If they want back me, I'll build it myself." Shadows danced on the walls as his pen scratched, relentless. The storm outside had calmed, but within him a new storm raged, not of despair, but of unbreakable resolve. He lifted his head toward the window, seeing his reflection burn with a fire he thought he had lost. This was no longer survival. It was rebirth. James returned to his apartment late, the silence broken only by the hum of traffic below. An envelope lay on the floor, slid under his door like a shadow's calling card. He ripped it open, hands trembling, and found papers marked confidential. The documents revealed financial transfers, backroom deals, and incriminating notes connecting Richard Hale with a rival firm months before James' collapse. His heart thundered as the truth struck. Every failure had been engineered. "He planted it all," James muttered, voice raw. The betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate strike. Rage welled, yet clarity sharpened. For the first time, James finally saw the battlefield for what it was. The next morning, James stormed into Daniel's small office, fury in his eyes. He dropped the file hard onto the wooden desk, papers scattering. Daniel's brows knitted as he flipped through each page, his face tightening with each revelation. "Richard set you up," he muttered, voice edged with disbelief. James nodded, jaw clenched. "Every leak, every deal, it all traces back to him." Daniel slammed his palm on the desk. "Then we fight back, not with anger but with precision." James sank into the chair, running a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. The truth burned like acid, but for the first time since the collapse, the path forward was clear. That evening, James returned to his mother's home, carrying the weight of betrayal. Sitting at the old wooden kitchen table, he confessed, "It wasn't just bad luck. Richard sabotaged me." Margaret's face paled as her hand flew to her mouth. "I always feared that man," she whispered, eyes filling with tears. James buried his face in his hands, shame and anger mixing. She reached across the table, her palm steady over his, her voice trembling but resolute. "Then don't let him take more from you. Rise higher than his reach." His throat tightened as her words sank in. He lifted his head slowly, eyes shining. Her faith reignited the flame Richard had tried to smother. Later that week, James confronted Richard at a glittering gala, chandeliers sparkling overhead. Richard held his glass high, laughing with investors, until James approached. Their eyes locked, tension freezing the air. Richard smirked, voice dripping venom. "Still chasing dreams, James, some never learn?" James leaned close, his voice low but laced with steel. "I know what you did." Richard's grin faltered, then returned with icy arrogance. "Proof means nothing without power," he said coolly. James stepped back, fire blazing in his eyes. The world didn't yet know the truth, but the war had begun. He wasn't just chasing survival anymore, he was hunting victory. After the confrontation, James wandered to the riverbank, city lights rippling across the dark water. The betrayal replayed in his mind, each memory like a dagger twisting deeper. Yet, beneath the pain, clarity grew stronger. He whispered to the night air, "He thinks he's broken me. He's wrong." The reflection staring back from the water was not the ruined man he once saw. It was someone harder, sharper, forged in fire. The cold wind cut across his face, but inside him heat surged. This fight was no longer about survival. It was about justice, redemption, and proving to every doubter that his vision could not be stolen. The air backstage was heavy with nerves, the muffled hum of a restless crowd seeping through the curtains. James clutched his notes, fingers trembling, heart hammering louder than the applause outside. Daniel leaned close, voice steady. "They're ready for you, James. Don't think about them, think about why you're here." James closed his eyes, inhaling slowly, exhaling determination. "This isn't just another pitch," he whispered. "This is everything." The stage manager motioned. Spotlights roared to life. He stepped forward, feeling the heat of destiny pressing against his chest. He wasn't walking to a stage, he was walking into battle. James stepped under the blinding lights, the hall falling into silence as hundreds of eyes fixed on him. His throat tightened, but he forced the first words out. "I've tasted failure," he declared, voice shaky, "but failure taught me resilience." Each sentence steadied his breathing, each word carried not just numbers, but scars. The projection behind him displayed growth charts, but no one looked at them. They looked at him. His conviction filled the room, drawing skeptical gazes into reluctant attention. Some investors leaned forward, captivated, others sat stiff, guarded. James felt the weight of judgment, but he no longer feared it. This was not just a pitch, it was a resurrection. Among the sea of faces, Richard Hale sat in the second row, smugness radiating like a poison. He leaned back, whispering to a colleague, "He'll choke before he finishes." James caught the glance, his fury ignited, but instead of faltering, his voice surged stronger. He pointed at the screen. "This is not about profits alone, it's about purpose. It's about building something that outlasts greed." A murmur swept through the hall, curiosity breaking the silence. Richard's smirk faltered, his grip tightening on the glass in his hand. James realized his words were no longer just a pitch, they were a weapon, and every syllable struck Richard where arrogance could not shield him. The investors unleashed a barrage of questions, sharp as arrows. "Your idea is bold, but what if you fail again?" one woman asked coldly. The hall fell still. James steadied himself, gaze unflinching. "Failure is inevitable, but surrender is not. I'll rise every time until success is the only option left." His words rang out like thunder, the silence afterward deeper than any applause. Daniel, watching from the side, felt pride swell in his chest, his eyes burning. James wasn't just answering a question, he was declaring war on doubt itself. The investors leaned closer, their skepticism now mixed with awe. James finished with a voice that carried beyond walls, beyond doubt. The hall erupted in applause, hesitant at first, then rising, filling the air like a tidal wave. Investors stood, some clapping reluctantly, others with conviction, but all unable to deny the fire they had witnessed. James stood still, letting the sound wash over him, not as validation, but as proof of survival. His gaze swept the crowd until it landed on Richard, standing rigid, jaw clenched, eyes cold. The smirk was gone. James whispered under his breath, "Unseen, unheard, this is only the beginning." For the first time since ruin, he didn't just believe, he knew. He was unstoppable. The morning after the pitch felt different. James unlocked the door to his cramped office, sunlight streaming through dusty blinds, laying gold across scattered sketches and coffee-stained notes. The air no longer smelled of failure. It smelled of beginning. He dropped his bag on the floor and looked at the walls covered in scribbles, once desperate, now alive with possibility. Daniel walked in behind him, carrying 2 steaming coffees, his grin wide. "You did it," he said, placing a cup on the desk. James chuckled, exhaustion pulling at his shoulders, but fire still burning in his chest. "I didn't win yet," he muttered, "but I changed the story." For the first time, the silence of the room felt like peace, not defeat. Later that week, Margaret stepped into his office, her cautious footsteps echoing on the old floorboards. She paused, eyes wide as she took in the walls plastered with blueprints, designs, and charts. "You built this from ashes," she whispered, awe softening her features. James smiled gently, guiding her to the desk. "Not alone," he said. "But yes, this is the beginning." She reached across the desk and clasped his hand tightly. "I didn't believe you before," she admitted, voice breaking, "but I see it now." Those words pierced deeper than applause, filling James with a warmth no investor could match. In her eyes, he wasn't reckless anymore. He was a man reborn from fire. By week's end, momentum shifted like a tide. The once silent phone rang constantly, investors scheduling calls, journalists seeking interviews, entrepreneurs offering partnerships. The inbox that once mocked him with emptiness now overflowed with opportunity. Yet James remained at his desk, scribbling fiercely in his notebook, every page a battlefield of ideas. "This is only the foundation," he muttered to himself. Daniel laughed from across the room, leaning back in his chair. Most people would be out celebrating. James shook his head, eyes locked on the page. "We celebrate later. For now, we build." Every rejection had sharpened him. Now, for the first time, he wasn't surviving. He was building an empire brick by brick. But shadows trailed his rise. Articles painted him reckless, too ambitious. Whispers in boardrooms spread, fueled by Richard's allies. One night, James sat under the dim glow of his desk lamp, reading a headline that cut deep. Too risky to trust. Doubt coiled like smoke around his chest. For a moment, the weight of old scars pressed back in, threatening to smother progress. Daniel, noticing the silence, crossed the room, arms folded. "Let them talk," he said firmly. "The louder they scream, the more afraid they are." James folded the newspaper slowly, slid it into a drawer, and straightened his back. His jaw hardened. "Then, let them scream," he said. "We'll let results speak louder." The air grew still, and in that silence, resolve hardened into steel. Weeks later, James returned to the same boardroom where humiliation had once crushed him. But now, the room felt different. Investors who once glared with contempt leaned forward with pens ready, their eyes filled with curiosity, not doubt. James stood tall at the head of the table, voice calm but filled with quiet power. "We are not just recovering," he said. "We are redefining what's possible." A hush lingered before applause erupted, confident, eager, undeniable. James scanned the faces, then glanced at Daniel, who smiled proudly. His thoughts flickered to his mother's trembling words, to nights scribbling under lamplight, to storms he once believed might drown him. This was no ending. It was ignition, the beginning of something far greater than survival. The launch day dawned radiant, the sky a canvas of pale fire. Backstage, James paced the narrow corridor, footsteps echoing louder than the muffled crowd beyond. His palms were damp, crumpled notes clenched though he knew the words by heart. Each breath carried ghosts, betrayals that cut, nights scribbling by lamplight, whispers telling him he was nothing. Daniel's hand gripped his shoulder, steady and grounding. "This stage isn't theirs," Daniel whispered. "It's yours." James closed his eyes, inhaled deep, and whispered, "Then let it roar." The curtain lifted. Light struck like lightning. The audience rose in thunder, not of pity but recognition. In that moment, shame dissolved like smoke, and James stepped forward, not as broken, but as reborn. Hours later, silence filled a glass-walled boardroom. The city skyline glittered behind Ava as she slid a contract across the polished oak. "This is bold," she said, voice calm but edged with respect. James scanned the lines, funding, deadlines, clauses sharp as blades. He saw risk woven with promise, chains mingled with freedom. He lifted his head. "We accept," he said, "but only if integrity remains ours." Ava studied him, then smiled faintly, nodding. Daniel exhaled laughter, relief softening his shoulders. James signed with slow precision, whispering, "No shortcuts, not again." The pen carved not ink, but a vow, sealing steel into vision. In that moment, James knew contracts no longer owned him. He owned his destiny. That afternoon, James faced the press, cameras flashing like lightning storms. He raised the very documents that once shattered him. "We chose transparency over vengeance," he declared, voice cutting clean. "Truth is our foundation." A reporter shouted, "Will you pursue charges?" James steadied his gaze. "We will pursue proof, but our verdict will be success." Murmurs rippled as pens flew across pages. At the back, Richard Hale stood rigid, smirk gone, eyes narrowed, jaw locked. For years, Richard had defined his shadow, but now James felt no hunger for revenge, only release. His words fell heavy, integrity scales. The room hushed, and silence thundered louder than applause, etching his declaration into memory. That night, far from cameras and applause, James walked a quiet street bathed in amber lamps. Margaret held his hands, her voice trembling but sure. "You kept your soul," she whispered, "and that is victory no one can steal." Daniel stood nearby, his weary smile radiant with pride, earned through years of loyalty. James' voice cracked, but his words were steady. "I didn't climb alone. I never could have." The city hummed, neon flickers dancing on wet pavement, the scars of the street mirroring scars of his journey. They laughed suddenly, not at jokes but at the sheer weight lifting from their chests. Margaret pressed his hand tighter. Rest, then rise again. For the first time, rest felt not like surrender, but like grace won through battle. Before dawn, James stood atop a rooftop. The city stretched below like a sleeping giant. The horizon was still dark, but light pressed at its edges, ready to break. Wind clawed at his jacket, pressing fabric tight against him like armor. He whispered, "I was never empty. I was untested." He thought of betrayal that cut, of failures that scarred, of nights where silence was his only companion. Yet every scar was no chain. It was a forge. The horizon cracked, spilling gold across steel towers, turning glass into fire. His eyes burned with calm defiance as he raised his chin. "We build what we choose to believe," he declared. The sun surged higher, blazing back in answer. And on that rooftop, James was not just a man, he was a builder crowned by dawn, his spirit etched into the skyline forever.